They said the manor's kitchen fire never died. For generations, it burned day and night, feeding the pride of men who believed obedience was the only true ingredient in a servant's craft. But every flame, no matter how long it burns, remembers the moment it was first struck. And someday, it remembers how to burn for itself. The manor of Lord Renfrew rose over the valley like a monument carved from arrogance. Its windows were eyes that never slept. Its chimneys, black pillars of smoke whispering to the sky. The villagers called it the house of endless hunger. Inside, the kitchen glowed like a forge. Copper pots gleamed, fire hissed, and heat pressed against the walls as though trying to escape. At the center of it all stood Elda the cook, whose name no one dared speak above a whisper. Her face carried years of quiet labor, her movements as precise as clockwork. She worked not with joy, but with the grace of one who had learned that resistance could exist in silence. Every morning began the same: grind the grain, knead the dough, taste the broth, listen for the bell. That bella, small silver thing that hung in the great hall, was her master's voice. It ruled her waking hours, dictating when she could breathe, when she must bow, when she was permitted to exist. And on this morning, it rang once, twice, thrice. Each note cut through the thick air like a blade through bread. Elda wiped her hands, straightened her apron, and stepped from the warmth of the kitchen into the marble corridors where her footsteps echoed in loneliness. The air grew colder with every step toward the hall. At the far end, Lord Renfrew sat before a grand oak table draped in velvet. His hair was powdered, his rings heavy, his face arranged into the calm of a man who believed the world owed him obedience. A single candle burned before him, not for light, but for judgment. He didn't look up as she entered. "Renfrew, you are late." "Elda, the fire would not catch." "My lord," the answer hung in the air, soft but steady. Renfrew finally lifted his gaze slowly, like a predator considering its prey. "Renfrew, then perhaps the fault lies not in the fire, but in the one who tends it." A cruel half-smile formed on his lips. The words weren't loud, but their weight filled the room. Elda bowed her head, not in fear, but in thought. Her hands trembled only once, long enough for her to notice, short enough for him to miss. Lightning flashed across the tall windows. For an instant she saw his reflection in the glass, powerful, confident, and unaware that his cruelty was carving his downfall one word at a time. Elda, internal. If mercy is forgotten here, perhaps it can be taught. She turned to leave, the echo of her steps swallowed by the storm outside. Behind her, the candle on the table flickered, its flame bending toward the door as if it, too, wished to follow her. As Elda stepped back into the corridor, thunder rolled above the manor like a warning unheeded. Behind her, the candle's flame stretched thin, then snapped upright, steady, defiant. In the silence that followed, a single spark leapt from the wick and landed on the velvet tablecloth. It did not burn. Not yet. But the air in the great hall seemed to change, as though the house itself had taken its first breath in years, waiting for the moment when silence would no longer obey. The storm passed, but the air in the manor did not clear. It clung to the walls like smoke that refused to leave, heavy, watchful, full of unspoken warnings. Elda returned to the kitchen as she always did, though something in her steps had changed. The silence that once weighed on her now felt lighter, as if she were walking beside a thought she could not yet name. The hearth glowed faintly, a ghost of fire licking at the coals. She knelt, added a handful of wood, and whispered to it the way others whispered to saints. Elda, softly, "Come alive. We both need warmth." The flame stirred, uncertain, then caught a living thing reborn. Her apprentice, Lena, stood in the doorway, her face pale from fear and sleepless nights. "Lena, he grows crueler with the seasons. Last winter he dismissed 3 workers for dropping a dish. Elda, cruelty is a fire that burns its keeper first. One day he will choke on the smoke." Lena hesitated, looking toward the great hall above. "Lena, he says he's planning something for tomorrow. He told the steward to make a spectacle of discipline." "Elda, then tomorrow we keep our eyes open and our hearts steady." A log cracked in the fire. Sparks leapt upward, scattering light across the stone walls. Elda stared at them, lost in thought. How many years had she fed this fire? How many times had she swallowed words to keep her peace, her place, her breath? Too many. The kitchen clock struck 9, the sound echoing like a bell of fate. Above them, muffled laughter and music spilled down from the grand hall. Lord Renfrew and his guests, feasting on power and vanity. Elda glanced at the vent above the oven. Through it she could hear fragments of conversation. Guest, faintly. Your cook is loyal, I hear. Renfrew, laughing. Loyal? No, tamed. There's a difference. The laughter that followed was sharp enough to cut. Elda's eyes darkened. She took the iron ladle from the table and placed it carefully on the counter, as though setting down a thought. Then she whispered to the fire again, Elda, if he wishes for silence, I will give it to him. Lena frowned, not understanding. Lena, give him silence? Elda, smiling faintly, every tyrant fears it. The day no one answers when he calls. The room grew still. Outside, the storm was gone, but the wind hadn't settled. It rattled the shutters softly. A rhythm like breathing. Elda reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small stone rough, gray, unremarkable. A flint. Her fingers brushed over it slowly, feeling its sharp edge. Lena, what's that for? Elda, for the morning, when the fire truly begins. Lena didn't ask more. She only watched as Elda placed the flint beside the hearth, where the flames cast its shadow high against the wall, a shape that looked almost like a hand reaching upward. That night, long after everyone slept, the fire in the kitchen flickered strangely once, twice, as if answering a silent call. And in the faint light, the flintstone shifted ever so slightly, as though something unseen had touched it. Dawn broke without color. A pale, washed-out light slipped over the hills and crept through the manor's narrow windows. It was the kind of morning that felt hesitant to begin, as if even the sun feared to witness what waited inside. The air in the courtyard carried the scent of wet stone and iron polish. Servants moved quietly, eyes lowered, their footsteps echoing like apologies. Something was about to happen. Everyone felt it, though no one dared to ask what. Elda knew before the bell rang. She felt it in the stillness of her pulse, in the way the air thickened when power prepared to display itself. When the silver chime finally sounded through the corridors, it was not a call, it was a sentence. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the great doors that led outside. There, Lord Renfrew stood in his long gray coat, flanked by the steward and 2 house guards. His expression was composed, the calm of a man about to prove his authority. Renfrew, the servants will gather. They will see what happens when discipline fades. The words carried across the courtyard, carried by pride and cold wind. Servants trickled in, Lena among them, her small hands trembling as she clutched her apron. Elda stood before them all. Framed by the gate's iron bars, Renfrew's voice was almost kind when he spoke. Renfrew, you've served long and well. Elda, but even fire needs control. You disobeyed, you delayed, and you spoke when silence was required. So you'll stand here until the sun falls. As a reminder, he gestured to the guards. They tied a thin rope around her wrists, not to hurt, just to humiliate, and bound them lightly behind her back. Then they stepped away. Renfrew turned to the others. Renfrew, let this be your lesson. The kitchen serves the master. Not the other way around? He dismissed them with a wave. As if scattering dust, the servants bowed their heads and began to drift back inside. But Lena lingered, her eyes wide and wet. Elda met her gaze and smiled softly, a smile that said more than comfort could. Quietly, do not look away. Even shame has something to teach. The hours crawled. The sun moved slow, a molten eye watching from above. Wind tugged at her hair. Dust clung to her feet. But Elda's spine did not bend. Every time a servant passed, she offered the same small nod, gentle, forgiving. And something began to change in their faces. Guilt turned to anger. Anger to understanding. Understanding to quiet strength. When the sun dipped behind the hills, Renfrew rode past on his horse, slow and deliberate. He didn't stop, didn't speak, only looked down, satisfied that the lesson was done. but Elda's eyes followed him, calm as the dying light. Elda, internal. He believes the world is made of chains. He will learn it is made of mirrors. She watched until he vanished into the mist. The guards untied her wrists. Her hands were stiff, marked only by faint rope-line symbols, not wounds. She flexed her fingers, studying them as if they belonged to someone newly born. Then she turned toward the manor. The lamps inside flickered unevenly, their light fluttering like nervous hearts. One flame in the top window burned brighter than the rest, steady, almost defiant. Elda, to herself, that is not a candle. That is a sign. Lena stepped forward, whispering. Lena, what do you mean? Elda, it means the house has begun to listen. As night fell, a strange hush settled over the manor. No dogs barked. No bells rang. And from somewhere deep within the walls came a single, soft crack like stone splitting, or a secret. Finally, exhaling. Elda looked up toward the glowing window and whispered, tomorrow, the silence will speak. Night settled over the manor like a shroud. The last echo of thunder had long faded, but the air still trembled as if remembering it. The torches in the courtyard burned low, their flames small, uncertain, bending with the wind. Beneath the manor, through a narrow stairway that smelled of earth and iron, the servants gathered. The cellar was damp and cold, filled with the scent of old wine casks and forgotten tools. A single lantern hung from a rusted hook, swaying slightly, painting their faces in amber and shadow. There were 9 of them. Men and women bound not by blood but by quiet endurance. They stood in a loose circle, hands clasped or folded tight, eyes glancing to the door each time the wind creaked it open. Elda stood at the center. Her wrists were still red from the ropes, yet her posture was calm like a storm that had found its purpose. Stable keeper. He'll notice we're missing. Elda, let him. A master grows weakest when he believes no one dares to speak. Washerwoman, and what would words change? He holds the keys, the wages, the walls. Elda, then we take what cannot be locked away. Her words fell into the room like stones into water. The ripples showed in their faces fear at first, then thought, and something close to courage. She moved closer to the lantern, its glow painting the lines of her face like carved truth. Elda, you think I stood in the courtyard for punishment, but I stood there to see, to listen, to remember who still looked back. Lena, you saw us. Elda, yes, and I saw the shame in your eyes. That shame is not weakness, it's the first sign of waking. The cellar fell silent. Even the wind seemed to wait. Elda, softly. He believes obedience is eternal. That silence keeps him safe. But silence can turn just as easily as fire. Tomas, the gardener. And what would we do, cook? We've no weapons. No power. Elda, we have choice. Tomorrow, when he calls, no one answers. A murmur spread through the group, hesitant, trembling. Lena, you mean refuse him? Elda, refuse to feed cruelty. Refuse to move for it, speak for it, serve it. Let him taste emptiness. Let him see the truth of his own hunger. The lantern's flame flickered, then steadied, taller, brighter. Lena looked at it with wide eyes. Lena, it burns higher when you speak. Elda, smiling faintly. Then it understands. A gust of wind swept through the cellar. The lantern swayed, its light bending toward Elda, casting her shadow across the entire wall, large, towering, almost inhuman in its stillness. Stablekeeper, whispering, you look like something beyond us. Elda, no, I'm what you've all forgotten. You are free in the heart, even when bound by the hand. The lantern dimmed again, the moment passing like a held breath released. They all stood quiet for a long time, listening to the faint hum of rain on stone. And in that stillness, something sacred was born. Not rebellion, not rage, but resolve. Elda, softly. Tomorrow, we begin without permission. As they filed out, one by one, the lantern's flame snapped sharply, then steadied into a thin, unwavering line of gold. Its reflection shimmered in the wine cask beside it, forming the shape of a rising sun. Elda was the last to leave. She paused at the door, eyes narrowing at the flicker.eld to herself. Even the light waits for dawn. By morning, the manor was alive with commotion. Carriages rolled up the long dirt road, their wheels cutting grooves through the mist. Servants hurried through corridors carrying silver trays and baskets of fruit polished to shine. The air smelled of rain, smoke, and ambition. Lord Renfrew had ordered a feast one of grandeur to remind the valley of his power. He wanted laughter in his halls, music to drown the whispers that had begun to rise beyond his walls. In the kitchen below, Elda stood among the chaos. Steam clouded the air, the clatter of ladles and knives creating a rhythm that matched the thundering of her heart. Yet she moved like calm water, her face unreadable, her motions exact. Lena, he asked for 10 dishes, 10. And everyone must be perfect. Elda, softly, perfection isn't always the same as satisfaction. She stirred the broth, watched the bubbles rise, then stopped. Slowly, she took the salt jar in her hands, weighing it as if it were made of glass and memory. Then, gently, she set it aside, untouched. Each dish she made that day gleamed beneath the light, golden pastries, roasted meat, sugared fruit, and bread soft as clouds. They smelled divine, looked flawless, yet lacked the smallest thing that made them whole. Every bite would promise richness and deliver emptiness. The servants exchanged uneasy glances as they carried the platters up to the dining hall. Stablekeeper, whispering, "Cook, are you sure?" Elda, "Completely. Sometimes truth needs no voice, only taste." The banquet hall glittered with chandeliers and pride. Music filled the air, violins and laughter weaving a mask over the simmering storm beneath. Lord Renfrew sat at the head of the table, his silver goblet raised, his smile polished for display. Ren fell. "Tonight, let all who dine here remember their place and the generosity that allows them to remain in it." Polite applause. The first course was served, knives clicked, spoons stirred, lips touched the food and confusion spread like a whispering wind. Brows furrowed, eyes darted. Guest one, "It's beautiful." Guest two, "But it tastes of nothing." Renfrew, "What do you mean nothing? This kitchen has never failed me." He took a bite himself, slow, deliberate, and paused. The silence that followed was thicker than any smoke. Elda from the back of the hall. Voice steady. "I seasoned every dish exactly as you've seasoned this house. My lord, without mercy, without kindness, without soul." Her words didn't shout. They echoed. Every head turned. Renfrew froze, his goblet trembling in his hand. The guests stared between them, between power and truth, and no one dared to laugh. A single candle on the table flickered wildly. Its wax spilled onto the cloth like pale tears. Renfrew, low, furious, "You forget who you serve." Elda, "No, I remember too well." The room seemed to tighten, as though even the walls were holding breath. Outside, the wind began to rise again, sweeping against the glass panes with the sound of distant waves. Renfrew, "You'll regret this, woman." Elda, "Perhaps. But regret is better than silence." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, without a word, she turned and walked toward the door. Her steps were slow, deliberate, echoing against the marble floor like a heartbeat too steady to break. As she reached the threshold. The chandelier above her flickered once, twice, then flared with unnatural brightness. Every candle in the hall rose higher, their flames twisting upward as if reaching for air that wasn't there. A chill ran through the room. The guests glanced at one another in confusion. Renfrew's eyes followed her retreating figure, but for the first time, something in them trembled. Uncertainty. When she was gone, the hall dimmed back to normal. Only the scent of her cooking remained, faint and hollow, and in that emptiness, Lord Renfrew realized he had never been hungrier. The storm arrived before dawn. Not the kind that shouted, but the kind that waited, its thunder pacing along the horizon. Patient as judgment, rain clawed at the windows of the manor, streaking the glass with silver lines that shimmered in the candlelight. Inside, Lord Renfrew's hall was quiet, too quiet. The feast from the night before still lingered on the table, half-eaten bread, spilled wine, untouched plates. All the beauty of a celebration that had turned hollow. Renfrew stood at the head of it, staring into the remains like a man searching for something he could not name. He had dismissed the guests hours ago, their polite smiles hiding unease. Even they, he realized, had feared Elda's words. Renfrew, lo, a servant's tongue should never carry truth. But it had, and now? It rang louder than thunder. He turned sharply as the steward entered. Breathless steward, my lord, the servants. None have reported for their duties. Renfrew, then wake them. Steward, I have. They are awake. They simply... Do not move. The lord's jaw tightened. Renfrew, do not move. Steward, they stand in silence. In the courtyard, waiting. The sound of the rain seemed to grow louder, pressing against the windows like the sea against a ship's hull. Renfrew strode to the balcony doors and threw them open. Wind burst into the room, scattering papers and flame alike. Below, in the courtyard, the servants stood in perfect stillness. Dozens of them. Soaked to the bone, heads unbowed, eyes lifted not in rebellion, but in quiet recognition, Elda was among them. The rain clung to her hair and apron, yet she looked untouched by it, calm, unbroken, as if the storm had chosen to protect her. Renfrew, what is this? Elda, calling upward, a lesson, my lord. You wished for silence. We grant it. Her voice was steady, carrying effortlessly through the rain. Renfrew, you will regret this insolence. Elda, perhaps. But you will remember it. He gripped the railing so tightly his knuckles whitened. The thunder cracked above him like splitting stone. Lightning flashed, illuminating every face below, each one marked by quiet dignity. Renfrew, you think I need you? You think this house depends on you? Elda, no, my lord. We know it does. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then came a gust of wind so fierce that the candlelight behind him died in an instant. The hall plunged into darkness, the storm's roar filling the emptiness it left. The servants did not flinch. Their silence grew heavier, louder until even the rain seemed to fall around it. Renfrew stepped back, shaken as though the house itself had shifted under his feet. The walls groaned. Somewhere upstairs, a portrait crashed to the floor. The manor's foundation, old and proud, shuddered in the storm. Renfrew, to himself, barely audible, "What have I built?" He turned from the balcony, his reflection catching briefly in a shattered goblet on the table. The face that stared back was pale, uncertain, human dote asterisk as he stepped away. The wind carried a faint sound, soft, rhythmic, from the courtyard below. Not words. Not laughter, humming that a low, steady melody, rising from the servants standing in the rain. A song without language, yet full of meaning, a prayer or a warning. Renfrew froze, listening. The tune wove through the storm, haunting, impossible to silence. Renfrew, whispering, "What are they singing?" The question went unanswered. The storm replied instead with thunder that sounded almost like applause. Morning came like an apology, gray, damp, and uncertain. The storm had passed, but the air in Lord Renfrew's manor hung heavy, thick with the scent of rain and ruin. The once proud estate looked weary now, its windows streaked, its banners sagging, its silence unnatural. The servants were gone. No footsteps echoed in the hallways. No laughter from the kitchens, no clatter of dishes, no songs from the garden. Only emptiness. Lord Renfrew walked the corridor alone, the solace of his boots striking against marble that gave no answer. He paused before each door as if expecting sound, expecting life, but none came. The house, for all its grandeur, felt like a tomb that had buried the living and left the dead behind to wander. He descended the staircase, his hand trailing along the banister polished by hands no longer here. The scent of smoke reached him, the kitchen. He followed it. The great hearth, once Elda's domain, stood cold and dead. Ashes lay gray and scattered like snow after a fire that had burned too long. The pots were clean, the counters cleared, but the air still carried her presence warmth that refused to vanish completely. Renfrew stopped at the table. There, resting in the middle, was a single unbaked loaf of bread, pale, shapeless, unfinished. Beside it, in the soft smear of charcoal, someone had written 6 words across the wood. "A house without kindness cannot rise." The words glowed faintly in the morning light. the ash reflecting a dull silver hue. He touched them with his fingers, tracing the edges as though they might answer him, Renful, quietly. Kindness is weakness. But his voice faltered, hollow in the silence. He looked around at the kitchen, the hearth that no longer burned, the walls that no longer echoed. And for the first time, he saw what Elda had seen every day, his reflection not in mirrors or glass, but in the lifelessness he had created. He sat at the table, the chair creaking beneath him. The room seemed to breathe around him, wood settling, rafters groaning, time itself sighing. He reached for the loaf and tore it open. The inside was cold, doughy, soft, unfinished. It fell apart in his hands. Renful, to himself, it doesn't rise. He stared at his palms empty, dusted with flour that wasn't flour at all. But the remains of pride turned to nothing, upstairs. The wind swept through the empty corridors. Doors opened and shut on their own, whispering as they moved. A portrait above the staircase, one painted long ago of Renful's father, leaned crooked on its hook. As the wind pushed through, the frame tilted further, the nail creaking until crack. The painting fell. The sound echoed through the house like a gavel striking judgment. Renful looked up sharply, eyes wide, breath short. The silence that followed was deafening. Ren fell, whispering, "Who's there?" No one answered. Only the low moan of the wind threading through the chimney like a ghost remembering its home. Asterisk. As he turned back toward the hearth, a small ember glowed faintly within the ashes, tiny, defiant, impossible. It shouldn't have been there. The fire had been dead for days. Renful stared, frozen. The ember pulsed once, as if breathing, and in its glow, for the briefest moment, he thought he saw the outline of a hand shaping, lifting, forgiving. He stepped closer, whispering into the empty room, "Elda." The ember flared brighter, then vanished. The river ran clear that spring. Its surface shimmered like glass, carrying fragments of light downstream, sun, sky, and the memories of storms long gone. Along its edge, a small cottage stood where once there had been only thickets and silence. It was built by hands that had once served but now shaped freely. The servants of the manor, no longer servants at all, had found their refuge here. The house was small, its walls timber-bird and humble, its roof thatched with straw that glowed gold in morning sun. But inside, laughter replaced orders. The clatter of dishes became music, and work became something gentler, something chosen. Elda stood at the hearth, kneading bread as the light streamed through the window. Flour dusted her arms like frost, her movements patient, rhythmic, full of grace. Each press of her palms into the dough was a prayer. Each breath a release of what had been carried too long. Lena entered, cheeks flushed from tending the garden. Lena, the crops are growing faster here. The soil soft, like it's glad to be touched kindly again. Elda, smiling, soil remembers everything. When it's treated with care, it gives back twice what was taken. From outside came the faint laughter of Tomas, the old gardener, teaching a boy to stack firewood. Birdsong threaded through the air. Even the river seemed to hum a quiet harmony between water and wind. Elda, softly. To herself, the world sounds different when fear is gone. She turned the bread, shaping it slowly, then brushed her fingers across the top, leaving a small mark, a spiral like a sun. Lena, what does that mean? Elda, it's a promise. That warmth returns to where it's been lost. By afternoon, the smell of baking filled the air, drifting through the trees to the nearby road. Travelers began to appear tired, hungry, drawn by the scent of comfort they could not explain. Elda welcomed them with gentle smiles and open hands, feeding them with bread and stories. She never asked where they came from, only if they had enough. In time, people began to speak of the house by the river. They said the bread there could heal loneliness, that every bite reminded you of home, even if you'd never had one. When night fell, the old hearth glowed bright against the dark, its fire steady and kind. The servants, now friends, now family, sat around it, the warmth brushing their faces in gold. Lena, do you ever think of him? Elda, after a pause, sometimes. Pity is all I have left for him. That, and hope that he has learned what hunger really is. She looked toward the window. where the reflection of the river light flickered across the glass calm. Eternal.elda. Kindness is the only thing that never runs dry. They fell quiet, listening to the hum of the river outside. The pulse of life renewed. Asterisk as the others slept. Elda stepped out beneath the stars. The moon lay low, turning the river to a silver path, and there, caught in a slow bend of water, floated a small, glowing object. Asterisk a lantern. Old, weathered, familiar. It bobbed gently toward her, its flame still alive despite the distance it must have traveled. Elda knelt by the bank, eyes soft with wonder. Elda, whispering, "Even lost light finds its way home." She reached out, but before her fingers touched it, the lantern drifted onward downstream into the mist, leaving only a trail of gold upon the water. Night fell soft upon the valley, the kind of night that asked the world to remember rather than to rest. The river gleamed like a ribbon of silver beneath the moon, carrying its steady whisper through the sleeping fields. In the small cottage by its edge, the hearth burned low, glowing like a patient heart. Elda sat beside it, stitching the corner of a cloth torn that morning, a quiet rhythm of needle and thread. Each pull of the string reminded her of years spent mending things that never stayed whole: hearts, dignity, faith. But tonight her hands moved without burden. She was no longer fixing the past. She was keeping the present alive. A knock came at the door, soft, hesitant. Lena rose from her stool, but Elda gestured for her to stay. She crossed the room herself and opened the door to the wind. A writer stood there, cloaked and weary, rain dripping from his hat. In his hands, a sealed letter glimmered in the lamplight, the wax gray, the crest unmistakable. He spoke with a voice low as the river's hum. "Writer, a message." "From the manor." Elda, calmly, "That house sends nothing but shadows." "Writer, then perhaps this is one that wishes to leave the dark." He handed her the letter and turned away before she could answer. His horse's hooves faded into the fog. Elda closed the door, holding the letter like something fragile and forgotten. The seal was Lord Renfrew's, his family crest, now cracked down the center. She broke it carefully, as if opening an old wound. Inside, the paper trembled slightly in her hands. The ink had bled from rain, but the words remained. "Elda, the halls are empty. The fire no longer burns. I have eaten alone for months, and the food tastes of nothing. I thought silence was power, but it has devoured me instead. If mercy still breathes in you, light one lantern for me when you bake your bread. I do not ask forgiveness, only remembrance." "R." The fire crackled once, softly, as though acknowledging the letter's weight. Lena leaned forward, whispering. "Lena, will you answer him?" Elda, after a pause, "No, some things must be answered with silence and light." She folded the letter neatly and set it beside the hearth. Then she lifted a small brass lantern from the shelf and lit it from the fire's steady flame. Stepping outside, she carried it to the riverbank, the wind tugging gently at her shawl. The water shimmered, catching the reflection of the lantern's glow. Elda, quietly, "Mercy is remembering without chains." She placed the lantern on the water. It drifted slowly, spinning once before the current claimed it. Its light floated downstream, steady, warm. Unafraid, the river carried it into the mist, toward the distant hill where the manor slept in its own darkness. Far upstream. In the ruins of Lord Renfrew's hall, a faint glow touched the window for the first time in months. Renfrew, half asleep by the cold hearth, stirred. The light reached across the stone floor and brushed his hand. He opened his eyes, whispering to the empty room. "Renfrew, is that you?" The lantern's flame wavered, as if answering, before fading softly back into the night. Dawn arrived without thunder, without ceremony. It came quietly, light slipping over the hills, touching the river first, then the trees, then the little cottage by its edge. The world held its breath as the first warmth returned to the earth. Elda stood by the window, watching the mist lift. Her hands rested on the sill, flower-dusted and calm. The night's rain had left diamonds of dew on the grass, each one catching the morning sun like a promise kept. Behind her, Lena stoked the fire. The bread had risen perfectly, this time soft, golden, fragrant. Lena, it's strange. The bread feels lighter lately, as if it knows it's meant to be shared? Elda, smiling faintly, everything becomes lighter when it's made for love instead of fear. The scent of baking filled the room sweet, grounding, alive. The others began to stir, Thomas from his corner, the washerwoman humming softly as she folded clothes, a boy chasing a rooster out the door with laughter. Life had found its rhythm again. Elda turned to the hearth. Its fire burned with an even glow, now no longer the furious flame of rebellion, but the steady light of belonging. She knelt beside it and placed another log upon the coals. Elda, softly, to the fire. Stay gentle and stay true. Outside, the river moved slower, as though savoring the sun. And far downstream beyond the bend, where the old manor stood, the faintest glimmer still floated. A lantern. Dim now, but alive, Elda's gaze followed the line of the water, her expression unreadable, half sorrow, half peace. Lena, quietly, do you think he saw it? Elda, I think the heart always sees what it needs to, even too late. She turned back to the table and broke a loaf in half. Steam rose like breath into the golden air. She handed a piece to Lena. Elda. Kindness isn't given for those who deserve it. It's given for those who need it most. They ate in silence, the kind that heals. Birdsong replaced thunder. Wind replaced command. The house by the river glowed with the simple dignity of peace earned. Not granted. As the sun climbed higher, the light reached through the window, landing on the folded letter that still lay beside the hearth. Its ink had faded overnight, but one word remained clear, untouched by time or flame. Remember. Elda looked at it once, then smiled. She stepped outside, letting the warmth wash over her face. The river shimmered endlessly, carrying lanterns and shadows alike toward the open horizon. The day had begun anew, not in triumph, but in quiet truth. Power fades. Fear forgets. But kindness endures. It builds what cruelty cannot break. And it burns not to destroy, but to guide those still lost in the dark.